Portland, Maine native Louisa Titcomb was a volunteer nurse at U.S. General Hospital, Division I in Annapolis, Maryland. The hospital was located inside the former Naval Academy, being used to house hundreds of sick and injured Union soldiers. In a letter to a friend, here is how Louisa described the grounds in the spring. Gay with showers and sunshine, the yards are brilliant with peach bloom, hyacinths, lilies, and the richest beds of English violets, over which the south wind comes sweeter than ever. The pleasant breeze and the thick aroma of blooming flowers must have comforted Private Leonard Peaslee as he arrived at the hospital on May 5, 1862. Leonard was sick and had been since volunteering with Company D of the 3rd Maine Infantry Regiment. As he checked into the facility at Annapolis, Leonard thought his stay would be a short one. He hoped that the doctors would finally cure him of his constant aches and pains, but he fully expected to rejoin the 3rd Maine within a few weeks. But that didn't happen. Leonard Peaslee walked into the hospital, and less than 2 months later, he was gone. He vanished. His hospital stay as fleeting and as fragile as Louisa Titcomb's peach blossoms. More than 400,000 soldiers were listed as missing at various points in the American Civil War. To be listed as missing meant one thing: no one knew where you were. Maybe you were wounded, lying in a field hospital waiting for help. Maybe you were captured and marched into a Confederate prison camp. Or maybe you had deserted. Or just maybe you were transferred for special duty and no one had recorded it. Most missing soldiers were eventually found, their status as missing nullified. But tens of thousands were never found. Most of these were soldiers killed in action and never identified. But some, like Private Leonard Peaslee, simply fell off the face of the earth. After the war, Clara Barton, another Civil War nurse, founded the Office of Missing Soldiers. Barton and her team received more than 63,000 inquiries from the general public. They ultimately located more than 22,000 of them. But most of these were soldiers who died in Confederate prisons. Yet despite her best efforts, Barton, who would go on to start the American Red Cross, wasn't able to find all of the missing soldiers. Tens of thousands remain missing to this day. Some estimates say 5% of the Civil War dead remain unidentified. Leonard Peaslee remains among the missing. Leonard's case is unique in that he didn't vanish on the battlefield. He wasn't wounded or captured. He walked into a Union hospital with a non-life-threatening illness and vanished. Bizarre circumstances, given that Union hospitals were meticulous about tracking their patients. So what happened to Leonard Peaslee? Where did he go? Today on Company D, we turn detective and take on the curious case of the missing private. First, we'll look back on Leonard's life and the devastating effects his disappearance had on his family. But we'll also examine all the available evidence. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have better luck than Clara Barton and the Office of Missing Soldiers. Because today on Company D, we try to do the impossible. We try and find a Union soldier who has been missing for 163 years. Hello and welcome back to Company D, the history podcast that tells the forgotten stories of everyday soldiers in the American Civil War. Our show isn't about generals and grand strategies. It's about the men in the ranks, their struggles, their triumphs, their fears, and their families. We focus on one company in one regiment, Company D of the 3rd Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Why? Because my great-great-grandfather, Charles F. Snell, was one of them. He wasn't from Maine, but an 18-year-old from Dedham, Massachusetts. But in 1861, while living with his brother in Bath, war broke out. And in a moment of youthful patriotism, he enlisted. His diary, his first-hand account, forms the foundation and the inspiration for this podcast. I'm your host, George F. Snell III. Yes, I know my name sounds a bit pretentious, but don't worry, we're not here for the fancy names. We're here for the soldiers, their lives, their stories. In this episode, we're investigating the mysterious disappearance of Leonard Peaslee, a 30-year-old ship's carpenter, a husband, the father of a baby girl, a girl named after a flower, Rose. One day Leonard was there, the next he was gone. So let's find him. Chapter 1: The Man from Whitefield. Halfway between Bath and Augusta, in a valley alongside the Sheepscot River, is Whitefield, Maine. A quiet farming community dotted with mills and fields. 3 villages made up the town: King's Mills, Turner's Corner, and Cooper's Mills. The rhythm of life here was steady, shaped by the seasons, the farms, and the river. In the spring, the land smelled of tilled soil, and in the fall, golden fields of hay swayed in the breeze. Leonard H. Peaslee was born here on September 4th, 1833. Leonard was the second of 4 children. He grew up in his family's modest 80-acre farm. His father, Nathan, worked the land, and his mother, Christina Dutton, managed the home. Alongside his brothers George and Lakin and his sister Joan, Leonard spent his childhood among the rolling fields, livestock pens, and with the steady hum of farm work. The Peaslee farm only had 25 acres of cultivated fields, but every acre mattered. The farm was in Kings Mill Village in the south of Whitefield. The Peasleys grew hay, potatoes, peas, and beans. 3 cows provided milk and fresh butter. A single pig was raised for meat. 7 sheep provided wool for their clothing. And just beyond their fields, Peaslee relatives, cousins, uncles, extended family, all working their own farms. By 1855, Leonard's older brother George had married and set up his own farm. His younger brother Lakin had taken over the heavy labor at their parents' homestead. But Leonard had dreams beyond subsistence farming. He left Whitefield and headed for Bath, a city of shipbuilders nearly 4 times the size of Whitefield. There, the smell of sawdust replaced the smell of tilled fields. Leonard became a ship joiner, a skilled craftsman shaping wood into doors, windows, and fine furniture. His hands, once used to plowing fields and shearing sheep, now built schooners that crossed the ocean. In Bath, Leonard found more than a new trade. He found Cornelia M. Studevant. She was the daughter of a blacksmith and the oldest of 4 children. Cornelia was 4 years older than him, but that didn't matter to Leonard. They married on April 28, 1857, at the Central Congregational Church in Bath. Leonard was 27 and Cornelia was 31. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Rosanna. They called her Rose and sometimes Rosie. In 1860, they lived with Cornelia's parents in a bustling household that included Cornelia's brother Frank, her sister Ellen, and her husband, William Ford. A crowded household, but about to become a lot emptier. Chapter 2: You're in the Army Now.
Come marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, swing to my heart, we welcome them, hurrah, hurrah, the men were cheering, the boys would shout, the ladies, they were...
When President Lincoln issued the call for 75,000 volunteers to help quash the Southern Rebellion, Leonard Peaslee answered the call. He enlisted for 3 years as a private in Company D of the 3rd Maine Infantry Regiment. When he joined, Leonard was 27 years old. He was taller than the average soldier at 5 feet 10 inches tall. His hair was dark, his eyes hazel. His skin was deeply tanned from working outside in the shipyards. There's no existing photographs of Leonard, but for some reason, we get a very Joey Tribbiani vibe. Okay, maybe that's just us. Like many others, Leonard probably believed the war would be a short one. Home by the fall, certainly home by Christmas, he'd be sharing Christmas dinner with Cornelia and Rosie. At the end of 1861, Leonard and the rest of the 3rd Maine were camped on the mustering grounds in Augusta. It was here, beneath the shadow of the State House, that they began their training. Abner Small of Company G later recalled the scene. A sort of park, green with trees and rough grass, he wrote. I remember the scent of lilacs there at dusk. Below us ran the silvery Kennebec River, and above us rose the old State House, its cupola burnished by the morning sun. We had new white tents. We were clothed in new gray uniforms and equipped and armed. Abner was a bit of a poet. The gray uniforms he mentioned would soon be replaced with blue ones. And soon the 3rd Maine would be off to Washington, D.C. Families, friends, and onlookers packed the Augusta train platform to say farewell. The 3rd Maine band played patriotic songs, and families clustered together. Tearful goodbyes, a last embrace, a final whispered promise. One can imagine Leonard hugging Cornelia, kissing 18-month-old Rosie, and boarding the train with a heavy heart, but with the expectation of returning to them soon. The train chugged off with families waving flags and handkerchiefs, and then the train rounded a curve in the track and was gone. Leonard left Maine a healthy young man who had never faced a serious illness before. That was about June 7th, 1861, Washington, D.C. The 3rd Maine arrived, exhausted but eager. The next morning, they marched to Meridian Hill, setting up camp in the sweltering summer heat. Then came the rain, a torrential downpour that soaked their tents and filled the air with dampness and sickness. By mid-June, Leonard wasn't marching anymore. The change in climate and the constant drilling and training wore him down. With his joints swollen from rheumatism, Leonard was confined to quarters. While the rest of Company D trained for battle, Leonard lay in bed fighting off the pain. It was not a promising start to his military career. Chapter 3. Sick, Unwanted, and Misplaced. It's unclear whether Leonard ever fought in a battle with the 3rd Maine. He was that sick. It's possible he fought at the Battle of Bull Run on July 31st, 1861. If so, it wasn't the combat that did him in, it was the marching. At Bull Run, the 3rd Maine marched more than 12 miles, maybe as many as 20 in less than 24 hours, much of it at double time. Many of the soldiers collapsed on the ground in exhaustion. Some fainted by the roadside. Others tossed away blankets, knapsacks, and frock coats to lighten their loads. Not even half the regiment made it to the battlefield. Whether he was at Bull Run or not, Leonard was back in the hospital the following month, the word sick scrawled next to his name in the Company D rolls. Leonard was treated for nephritis, an inflammation of the kidneys. Nephritis, also known as Bright's disease, causes fever, joint pain, fatigue, and blood in the urine. Left untreated, it can lead to kidney failure. By late summer, Leonard was no longer the healthy young father who kissed his wife and child goodbye in Augusta. His condition worsened. By October 31st, Leonard was transferred to U.S. General Hospital, Division I in Annapolis, Maryland, for the first time. He was diagnosed with diabetic nephropathy, a complication of diabetes that can damage the kidneys. He remained in the hospital for 2 months, but on New Year's Eve, Leonard was released and returned to the 3rd Maine, now settled into winter quarters outside of Washington, D.C. Leonard must have been relieved, and maybe part of him embraced the cold weather. At least it was more like home. But Leonard's health woes continued. He struggled throughout the spring of 1862. He was admitted to the regimental hospital on May 2nd, treated for chronic rheumatism, but kept feeling worse. 2 days later, he was transferred back to the U.S. General Hospital in Annapolis. He arrived on May 5th to the pleasant breeze and blooming flowers that so impressed Nurse Louisa Titcomb. We don't know what Leonard was being treated for once he got to the hospital, but it's fair to say either the nephritis or the complications from diabetes. Either of these conditions could be fatal if left untreated, but Leonard's case didn't appear severe. By the end of June, he was deemed healthy enough to return to his regiment. In a letter to his wife Cornelia, written on June 30th, Leonard told her he would soon be leaving the hospital to rejoin the 3rd. He was several times sick in the hospital for a short time, Cornelia recalled years later, but at no time did I fear from his letters that he would not get well. Cornelia received Leonard's last letter on July 4th, 1862. She never heard from him again. No one did. Leonard Peaslee had vanished.
Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. Swing to my heart, he welcomes and hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out.
Chapter 4. Families in Confusion. Two events with his family may have contributed to obscuring Leonard's disappearance, distracting his family from taking quicker action that might have helped uncover Leonard's fate. The first event happened on the Peaslee side of the family, on the Whitefield farm where Leonard grew up. His father, Nathan Peaslee, the patriarch of the family, died on August 6, 1862. His death happened several weeks after Leonard's disappearance, but maybe not long enough between his letters home for anyone to realize Leonard was gone. Then, before they could notice, an unexpected and heartbreaking death. Nathan died at just 51. Not to mention that Nathan's death occurred right as the family was heading into harvest. The family was already stretched thin, with his older brother now having his own farm and Nathan's farm being short-handed with his passing. As subsistence farmers, the Peasleys were already struggling with inflation and labor shortages in the wartime economy. Now the head of their family was gone. Nathan was buried at Kings Mills Cemetery in Whitefield. Afterward, the tight-knit Peaslee clan fell into mourning, and then the harvest was in full swing. Did the burden of losing Nathan and dealing with the harvest short-handed distract the Peasleys from putting more effort into locating Leonard? It's a distinct possibility. The second event happened with Cornelia's family back in Bath. Before the war, Leonard and Cornelia had been living with Cornelia's parents, her brother Frank, her sister Ellen, and her husband William Ford in a single household, likely in a multi-family house. Both Frank and William were actively recruited to join a new Maine regiment forming a company in Bath. The 21st Maine Infantry Regiment was looking for men willing to volunteer for shorter terms of service, 9 months rather than 3 years. Both Frank and William, Leonard's two brothers-in-law, volunteered during the summer of 1862. The disruption and stress of losing 2 more members of the family must have been profound, and likely a distraction away from Leonard's predicament. Frank and William joined Company C of the 21st and officially mustered into service on September 10, 1862. They left for service just as it was becoming clear that something had happened to Leonard. Yet neither Frank nor William was now in a position to help Cornelia deal with her missing husband. They were marching off to war. The 21st ended up in New Orleans for most of the war, although William had been detached for special duties in New York. But both Frank and William now had more pressing matters to deal with. When their commissions ended on August 25, 1863, and Frank and William finally returned to Bath, Leonard had been missing for more than a year. One wonders if Leonard's disappearance influenced William Ford's next move. He decided to re-enlist, this time volunteering for 3 years with the 32nd Maine Infantry Regiment as a sergeant. Then, within a year, he too would be among the missing. William Ford ran into trouble at the Battle of the Crater on July 30th, 1864. A failed assault by the Union Army that General Ulysses S. Grant called the saddest affair I have witnessed in this war. During the siege of Petersburg, Virginia, the Union Army concocted a bizarre scheme to dig a mine shaft below Confederate forces and blow it up. This, they believed, would cause a gap in the Confederate defenses, which they could exploit with an attack. But the scheme failed spectacularly. The Confederates had been warned in advance and had pulled back into a defensive fortification. So when the explosion took place, it simply formed a deep crater. But the Union Army sent thousands of men into the crater, thinking they would finally break the Confederate line. Instead, they found themselves in a trap, sitting ducks for the Confederates. More than 5,000 Union troops were lost in the onslaught. William Ford was one of them. He was reported missing in action. Another man swallowed by the war. Gone, just like his brother-in-law, Leonard Peaslee. Chapter 5. Lost and Found. When Leonard arrived in Annapolis on May 5, 1862, he appeared to be the only member of the 3rd Maine at the hospital, which added to his isolation. Had Leonard been sent to the U.S. General Hospital in Alexandria, he would have been with at least 9 other members of the 3rd Maine, familiar faces, men who knew him, or at least of him. But at Annapolis, he was by himself. Leonard was last seen on June 30th, the same day he mailed his letter home to his wife. His mysterious disappearance would forever haunt Cornelia, Rosie, and the rest of his family. To complicate matters, he was never officially recognized as missing. The 3rd Maine kept Leonard on its rolls for more than a year, claiming that he was still sick at the hospital, and later claiming he'd been discharged and sent home to Bath. Neither statement was accurate. It was a clerical mistake, repeated over and over again. It was a mistake that had terrible consequences for Cornelia and Rosie. It made it nearly impossible for Cornelia to secure a widow's pension, even as she slid into poverty. We'll address that tragic situation in a moment. Years later, William Watson, the captain of Company D when Leonard disappeared, admitted to the mistake. He said that the last time anyone heard from Leonard was on June 2, 1862, while he was being treated at Annapolis. Since that time, Watson acknowledged, I know of no one who has heard from him. Sarah Sampson, a Maine volunteer nurse in Washington, D.C. at the time, remembered seeing Leonard at Annapolis. I distinctly remember Mr. Peaslee, Sarah wrote. He was several times under treatment there, but not for long periods. I remember when the regiment moved and he was sent to some hospital sick. He didn't return. It was never reported. There was much talk about it in the regiment. We all supposed him dead, she stated. Cornelia recalled years later how she watched, waited, and prayed for her husband's return. For weeks, months, and years, she said. And when at last the war was over, I thought he might have been a prisoner and would now surely come back to us. But he never came. Cornelia was likely thinking about her brother-in-law, William Ford. Remember William? He went missing at the Battle of the Crater. What Cornelia hoped had happened to Leonard, captured and then released, is what happened to William. Like most soldiers reported missing, William Ford was finally found. He had survived the slaughter at the Battle of the Crater, a battle that became one of the most infamous of the war. Not only because of the battle's bizarre circumstances, but because evidence was eventually uncovered that Confederate soldiers wantonly executed wounded black Union soldiers. It's one of the worst atrocities of the Civil War. William, however, survived the Battle of the Crater. He was captured by rebels and taken prisoner. He was held in a makeshift stockade prison near Blandford Cemetery in Petersburg. It was an open-air enclosure where Confederates herded captured Union soldiers. It's not clear how long William spent as a POW, but he was eventually paroled and discharged from service on May 24, 1865. William Ford got to do something his brother-in-law Leonard Peaslee never had a chance to do. He went home. Chapter 6. Cornelia's Ordeal. One of the many rejections Cornelia Peaslee received from the U.S. Pension Office while seeking a widow's pension was quite blunt. There is no evidence showing the date or cause of the soldier's death, if he is even dead, and it is apparent that the claimant cannot furnish any satisfactory evidence thereof. In other words, show us a body or you get nothing. Because Company D repeatedly listed Leonard as either absent at hospital or finally discharged date unknown, no one in the 3rd Maine realized he was missing. As a result, no one in the regiment was looking for him. That meant there was no record of Leonard being deceased. Yet Cornelia knew her husband wasn't alive. When she first filed for assistance in 1868, the war had been over for 3 years, and her husband had never returned. Cornelia knew Leonard, knew he would never have abandoned her and Rosie. Never. So Leonard had to be dead. There was no other explanation for his absence. But the U.S. Pension Office wouldn't believe her. It took an act of the U.S. Congress to get Cornelia her much-deserved widow's pension. House Bill 1175 was passed on June 8, 1868, and granted Cornelia a pension. All of that for $8 a month with an extra $2 for Rosie. $10, the equivalent of $175.40 in today's money. Cornelia remarried in 1875, and as a result lost her pension. Her second husband died in 1894 when she was 64 years old. Facing abject poverty in her elderly years, Cornelia reapplied for her widow's pension. And guess what? She was rejected again. The reason? She couldn't prove that Leonard was dead. It was deja vu all over again. It took yet a second act of Congress to restore Cornelia's widow's pension, and it took nearly 10 years for that to happen. House Bill number 1518 was passed on February 26, 1907. The good news? The 78-year-old Cornelia, who is now nearly blind, got a raise to $12 a month. The only good news in this bureaucratic merry-go-round was that the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Pension Office, the U.S. Army, and several Bath lawyers investigated Leonard's disappearance and left us a fact pattern to follow, a paper trail, if you will. Let's see if we can follow that trail to find out what happened to Leonard Peaslee. Chapter 7. Finding Leonard. It's time to play detective. Choose your favorite. Travis McGee, Harry Bosch, how about Miss Marple or Inspector Bucket? I think we should avoid Inspector Clouseau. Here at Company D, we're very partial to Sherlock Holmes.
I must congratulate you, Mr. Holmes. You're far more clever than I thought.
Here are some crucial facts of the case, pulled from Leonard's pension files. Private Leonard Peaslee arrived at U.S. General Hospital, Division I at Annapolis, Maryland, on May 5, 1862. Company D last heard from Leonard on June 2nd, while he was still at the hospital. Cornelia Peaslee's last letter from Leonard was dated June 30th, 1862, and sent from the hospital. There is no death record of Leonard Peaslee at the hospital. Two things become clear. Leonard was discharged from the hospital on or a few days after June 30th, 1862, and he never made it back to Company D. We can confidently conclude that Leonard went missing while in transit. This would mean that a doctor at the hospital would have issued Leonard a return to duty order. Those orders would have included a travel pass and maybe subsistence and transportation vouchers. So Leonard must have left Annapolis sometime between June 30th and July 5th of 1862. At that time, the 3rd Maine was fighting at the 7 Days Battles on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, a distance of more than 150 miles. To rejoin the 3rd, Leonard's most likely travel itinerary would have been a train from Annapolis to Baltimore, about 30 miles, a day's travel. Then a train from Baltimore to Washington, D.C., another half day. Followed by a steamship from Washington to Fortress Monroe or Harrison's Landing, Virginia, 1 or 2 days. And lastly, up the James River into the chaos of the 7 Days Battles. By the time Leonard would have been arriving, the Union Army was in full retreat. Confederate forces controlled the roads in the area. The James River was jammed with troop transports and gunboats. And somewhere in that mess, Leonard vanished. The whole thing sounds like a scene from Apocalypse Now. Anything could have happened to him. Killed by the Confederates, captured and later dying in a rebel prison. He could have drowned in the James River. Maybe he was murdered and robbed. It's even possible he received a head injury and suffered from amnesia. But buried deep within Leonard's thick file at the U.S. Pension Office are 2 documents that give us a more plausible scenario. The first is called Declaration of a Widow for Restoration of Pension. In it, Cornelia Peaslee claimed to have received information that Leonard died in a railroad accident while heading back to the 3rd Maine. The second document is from the U.S. Treasury Department, dated August 1st, 1902, and it bears being quoted directly. The claimant states that the soldier was last heard from at Annapolis Hospital, Maryland, on the 30th of June, 1862, or was killed in a railroad accident while in the line of duty and serving in the U.S. Army, proof of which is now on file at the Pension Department. Aha! A railroad accident in a war zone. A lone soldier killed. Nobody can identify him. He's buried as a John Doe. Does this explain what happened to Leonard? We think it does, but we wanted to be sure. So we uploaded everything we had: Leonard's fact pattern, travel window, hospital records, and pension file, and put it into the AI platform ChatGPT and asked it, what is the most plausible explanation for Leonard Peaslee's disappearance? What follows is informed speculation, grounded in the data we possess and the wartime context surrounding Leonard's disappearance. Here's what our AI overlord, ChatGPT, told us.
Official military records contain no direct mention of Private Leonard Peaslee. After his hospital release, he essentially vanished from the rolls. He is not listed as a deserter or prisoner, and no battlefield casualty report fits his case. This strongly corroborates the family tradition and pension affidavits. Leonard Peaslee was very likely killed in a transit accident in July 1862, while trying to return to his unit.
Case closed. Chapter 8, Gone but Not Forgotten. Cornelia passed away on March 29th, 1914 at the age of 84. She died after being confined to her bed for the last 7 years of her life and blind for the last 5. Cornelia was in the care of her daughter, Rose, who confided that her mother was a patient and uncomplaining sufferer. Rose was a lifelong resident of Bath and was married for 67 years. Unlike her father, Rose lived a long life, passing away at the age of 89 in 1948. She witnessed the invention of the automobile, the airplane, the microwave oven, and color television. She experienced 2 world wars and the Great Depression. but she never had a father. When Rose was 18, she married Edwin Paris. Edwin was a well-known Bath spar maker, a carpenter who specialized in crafting ship masts. Together, they had 5 children. Rose honored the memory of the father that she truly never knew by giving her firstborn son the middle name of Leonard. Leonard Peaslee vanished amid the chaos of war, yet his name endured, passed down by his daughter in quiet remembrance. Sometimes that's how history survives, not in monuments or medals, but in middle names, in diaries, and in the stories that families share with one another. That brings us to the end of the curious case of the missing private. Thank you for tuning in to Company D. We hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to having you join us for the next one. Please send us a note on our website or reach out to us on social media. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. I'm your host, George F. Snell III. See you next time. And remember, if you're going to start a war, keep it civil.
Company D is a product of Dark Party Productions, all rights reserved. Unauthorized retention, duplication, distribution, or modification of copyrighted materials is strictly prohibited by law. Company D is written, hosted, and produced by George F. Snell III. Our editor and co-producer is Jay Brewer. The Company D theme music was written and composed by Jay Brewer. Sound effects and additional music were provided under Creative Commons License 0 by Freesound, Sound Bible, and the Library of Congress. We'd also like to thank Richard Moore for his Civil War battle sounds on Freesound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. The content is provided as is with no guarantees of accuracy, completeness, or timeliness.